Hey everybody, it's Don. It's August 6, 2024, and I'm in my backyard just to give you an update on midsummer bonsai in the Midwest. So let's take a look. I'm going to start by showing you a bonsai display bench that I built this spring to show my developing collection on my deck. So it's very simple. There's no nailing, no screwing, no anything. These are just 2x6s stacked on half blocks, okay, just 4 and 3, just with those boards cut this length and laid across there. Cost probably about 50 bucks maybe to buy the materials for that, and about 10 minutes to construct it, 15 maybe, cut a few boards and stack those blocks. And so I think that looks pretty nice, actually, right? Now, the best way to display bonsai, which I'm not all set up for yet, is to have either a light colored wall behind it or a dark colored wall, so you can see the trees contrasting against a lighter or contrasting background. Here, my background's all green, okay? The rest of the yard, trees and shrubs. So these things don't quite stand out like they could if there was a solid wall behind them. But I don't know, I think it looks pretty nice anyhow. Now let me show you what I have here. I have done a couple of these trees on camera with you in the past over the winter. And so let me just start with this one. Okay, this particular tree is one that I styled on camera back in, I believe it was December. Okay, so it's still wired. It leafed out relatively well, but since it was this was its first initial styling and potting, I've just potted it in actually a bowl that I drilled holes in, drainage holes. It hasn't grown a great deal in its first year, but it looks quite good for its first year. And so that'll just keep growing until I continue to refine it and prune it and so forth. And now let me make a point about the wires. Okay, so I wired that in December, and it is not nearly ready to be unwired yet. Okay, and here's the lesson. This tree, which I like a lot, these are both dwarf Alberta spruces, by the way. This tree I had wired, okay? I did this one about a year ago, okay? And I decided, I thought the wires were starting to cut in. There's some evidence that they were starting to cut in here, which you ideally don't want to happen. It's just where the stem is growing into your wires, so you've got to get the wire off. So I decided to unwire it, but it wasn't ready. Okay, these branches sprung back quite a bit from where I had this tree wired, okay? And so it wasn't ready to be unwired. So that's a lesson. This was a spruce tree wired almost a year ago, was not ready to be unwired yet. Those branches had not set in position. Now, it wasn't a big deal that they did that because I needed to rewire this tree anyhow. What spruces tend to do, like most trees, is the tips will curl up back to the sky, even if you've tried to pull the branches down into, a position that reflects where they might be if they were an older tree. So these tips were curling back up, and so they were in need of wiring, and so a little bit of pruning and some wiring to put them back down into place. So that's something I'm going to do with this tree very soon, rewire it, and sort of spread these pads out on this spruce, and to make this this would be what you call formal upright. Okay, a nice straight tree. It's going to have a rounded top, but yeah, these branches need to be pulled back down, open up the spacing, flattened out a little bit, and have the pads spread out. So that'll take me half an hour here. I might film it with time lapse. I don't want to take you through that whole process, but I'll do that another time. All right, now what I have beside this particular tree I grow olive trees. I grow olive trees in large pots for ornamental reasons and to try to get fruit off of them. But I also have little olive trees, some of which I've been bonsaiing and starting to develop as bonsais. So I have two small olive trees right here. Here's a small one I've had for a while. I once had this trained into a nice kind of curled top, but I made a mistake and damaged the bark. And so I've had to prune that piece off. And so we're starting over with this particular starting point, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, but that's just that tree is probably on the order of 8 years old, I'd say. You know, one lesson about bonsais though in small pots is they will not grow fast. Okay, that stem is not going to thicken on that tree very quickly. So this one's likely to remain a pretty small bonsai throughout its life unless I decide to take it out and put it in a larger pot for a while. Okay, and let it grow out. Here's another I've been training in the same way. Kind of a informal upright, sort of you can see the bend to it there. And just starting to develop, pull some branches out. There's a few rules being broken here about where the branches join the stem here. But again, this is still just a starter, but it's doing okay. Okay, so olive trees are, you know, I'm in Ohio here, so they will grow quite well outside from spring till deep into fall, till around Thanksgiving. Then they do need to be moved indoors. They need to be moved indoors to, not in your house necessarily, but like in an unheated garage over the winter, just because they cannot tolerate our coldest temperatures in the winter here in Ohio. More or less though, I take all of these bonsais in my unheated garage over the winter. They could make it out here, the deciduous trees and the evergreens, but just to avoid any freezing damage or deer damage and things like that, I do take them inside. Okay, the next I'll show you, well, let me just deal with the Alberta spruces and finish that out. Here's one that I trained this winter as well. Okay, in a windswept fashion. All right, so those branches are wired. And again, this is the sort of kind of tree you might see growing on the, you know, the tip of a cliff or a ridge with winds prevailing from one direction. So they tend to lose their foliage on the windward side and keep it on the leeward side. So that's an Alberta spruce, dwarf Alberta spruce, that I'm training as a windswept tree. I think it's pretty cool. That rock in there is both for decorative purposes, but also because it's helping support that tree on its lean until it really establishes roots. Okay, these were again just styled over the winter time, put in these pots in early spring. So they have developed quite substantial roots. I'll tell you how I know that here soon, but so it grew out this year, not extensively, but I'll continue to refine that in the windswept pattern. Okay, next I'd like to show you these Asian ash species I have, starting with one I styled or repotted for you on camera. Okay, this is called a Barron's ash, Fraxinus baroniana. And I repotted this tree on camera for you back in, it must have been in February. All right. These trees are very vigorous growers. Okay, they will flush out several times in the spring and early summer. In fact, when I brought this tree outside in the spring, it actually froze. Its initial growth froze back with a frost, but it rebounded and it flushed 2 or 3 times after that, right? So you have to prune this one periodically through the season to keep it in shape. But then it now has not flushed for, oh geez, at least a month or more. Okay, it's basically just been growing, thickening its trunk, growing its roots, and it's doing quite well. This is one I showed how you want to look at a tree in both the front and back directions. This would be a potential front, except it's leaning back, where this is a nice front, okay, because that stem is leaning toward you more, which is what you want in bonsai. So this is one, it's about as big as I'm going to let it get in terms of volume. But it's the one challenge with this tree is that pot is a little too small for this particular tree because it dries out very quickly. Okay, there's very good nabari, you know, that exposed root structure there. And when I potted this plant, there's a lot of root. I removed a lot of root from this, partly because these trees were grown in larger pots, which allowed them to grow vigorously for a while. And then I trimmed them down to fit into this bonsai pot. But this one's a little too small. So I'm certain that pot is now filled with roots. And this tree was hard to keep watered, especially when it was growing very vigorously. So I'll put that one up in a slightly bigger pot, probably in the spring, early spring. And but I think it looks pretty darn nice. It has a nice structure, an informal upright with a little gin here. And my moss did pretty well. Okay, I don't know if you remember on that video, but I dressed this one with moss from my yard. And moss comes and goes, its appearance comes and goes as it dries. When it dries, gets drier, it sort of turns brown and, you know, its growth slows. As soon as it gets water, it usually springs back, greens right back up. So I have moss in several of these trees. There's one I was developing down there. So that moss has worked out pretty well. Okay, now just quickly, here's another one of the same species I have in development. This one's newer in development. It's just in the base of an old plastic pot I had it in. And so this thing grew like crazy this particular year. I had to prune it several times and do a couple of style things to it. But I just kind of wanted to make sure it caught well, filled that pot with roots. And next year I'll put it into a better, more appropriate bonsai pot and decide the style exactly. This is turning into kind of a broom style with multiple stems. But you know, I put some movement in some of the stems, some curvature, and I'll just see how it buds out in terms of the branch structure in the next, well, it's done for this year, but for next spring we'll see where it goes. But again, this is probably about the height. I'll retain it, maybe a little bit bigger. And then, you know, it's still very much in development. There's a big scar here of a stem that I trimmed, where I chopped it right there, that I will carve a little bit just to basically taper that trunk there a little bit better. Okay, but it's done pretty well. I had two others that I started at the same time, but they just didn't make it. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. As you'll see, my collection is very much in development, or fairly early stages of development. I've just gotten into this in the last few years, although I had some trees I was playing around with for a while. So here's another one. Here's one I've had about 4 years. And this is a cascading juniper. Right, and so again, I'm mostly just letting this grow out because I'd like it to get bigger before I really style those branches. I will eventually pull those branches out and develop pads, flatter pads on those branches. But I have thinned out along the stem quite a bit there to reveal the stem, take a look at the branch structure, and but it's doing quite well. And then on the top here, the top part will basically grow into like the head of the cascade, kind of a little tree-like structure with then a large cascading branch down the side. So that's my cascade. That's an Asian Chinese juniper, and that one was acquired. I bought initially. This is the only tree that I bought as a bonsai. It was just, all it was a little, obviously juniper that had been trained to have a curvature in the main stem initially. That was about 4 years ago. And so this is where we are with it at the moment. All right, so here's an example of backyard yamadori. I've mentioned yamadori in the past. Yamadori is the collection of wild material that has some qualities of bonsai that you further develop into bonsai. And so this is a Japanese maple, and it's a seedling I just found in my yard. So I just stuck it in this pot for the time being, which had another tree in it that failed. And so put a little bit of curvature into some of the stems, and I'm just letting it grow this year. Again, and seeing where it has lots of buds, I can see it's going to back bud all over. And we'll see where it goes in the future, but it looks like it's well established. And you know, Japanese maples with those very unique leaves are very popular in bonsai. And there's several species of Asian maples or cultivars of Japanese maple that are used. Okay, so that's, I think, for the most part, leaving me to my primo specimens, my pride and joys, and these are my larger olive trees here. Now these are trees that I've been developing slowly for, let's see, these trees I've been developing for about 9 years. Okay, the trees were about 5 years old when I acquired them. The initial treatment was to cut the stem back to within about 4 or 5 inches from the ground. And then these were grown in larger pots for quite a long time, larger flower pots, not bonsai pots. Obviously, these aren't really true bonsai pots either. These are just clay pots that you can acquire from a big box store. But I think they work quite well with olives. Olives look really nice in clay pots, if you ask me. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about pot colors in a second, but this is the one that I like the most because it conforms, I'd say, the most to bonsai rules. I mean, I've been working on it in that sense. But when I started these trees with that initial trunk chop, they just sprouted out limbs all over the place. I really wasn't that knowledgeable about bonsai. And so I just kind of grew them more like, what do you call it? Topiary trees, okay, on my deck, okay? And so I didn't really train them in a bonsai style. So I've had to fight them into bonsai styles. So for example, in this spot, I've been working to spread these branches out and make a large pad here. Okay, I've been trying to bend branches back out and put spacing between those branches. You know, everything wants to grow upright, generally on a plant, naturally. And so you have to wire. You can see I have some wire in here. I had this tree wired initially and unwired, and I've had to put some more wire back on. So I'm basically slowly massaging this tree into a bonsai style, which it's getting there, I think. And once this thing is fully developed, I think it's going to be really nice. Like here's just an example. Here's a branch I'll probably pull down a little bit more into this position. You don't want to come straight at the viewer. This would be the front of the tree, I think, primarily. But there's no sense it growing into these branches either. So I'll spread that out a little bit with some wire. And get some more back budding, okay, which will fill in some of these gaps. And okay, now I had just repotted these, and I have 2 other trees like this here. Repotted these trees in the early spring into these pots from the larger flower pots. So first of all, they have some wild nabari, okay, which I really like. It will be further refined with time. Okay, but they're getting a nice thick trunk at the base here with a lot of interesting nabari. And this one got knocked over here recently. All right, so it fell, I think, actually I get deer on my porch sometimes, my deck here, and so I think literally the deer knocked it over. They don't eat olives, by the way, which is nice about that. But it got knocked over and the pot broke, and the whole root ball basically stayed together. So this tree, in the course of this season, has filled this pot, not terribly, but filled it well with roots. So it has re-rooted, and that's where it spent a lot of its energy this particular year. It did not leaf out and produce as many leaves and new shoots as these trees normally do. It's done quite well. It looks quite fine, other than some mistakes I made in breaking a branch or two. But it did not grow as much as it would normally. I expect next year, since its roots are fully established now in there, that it will really take off and require more pruning. I have not had to prune it a great deal this year. Somewhat, but not a great deal. So that's one of my olives, one of my pride and joys. Here's another one. Okay, and as you can see, these are larger bonsais. Some people don't even realize that bonsais can get this large. They can get much larger, as bonsai enthusiasts know. This one's quite wide-spreading. I will probably work to restrain that a little bit, okay? But again, I'm just getting these branches into place and refining their position, and then once it starts to really grow back again, shoot and leaf-wise, I'll prune it more into, I want to fill in some gaps in this area with new branches. Here's, for example, some branches that will fill gaps, and pull some branches out in those empty spaces. And then I won't let it get any wider than this. In fact, I may bring it back some from where it is. It's getting a little bit too wide until it gets a little taller. So this will be the new head, essentially. Okay, you always want bonsai to conform somewhat to a pyramidal shape. Okay, so this will be the new head coming out, going down. Now there's a lot of empty space here in the middle. That's an issue with bonsai, and so I'm hoping maybe to get some back budding in some of these branches here. This branch here has been the biggest issue with this tree. It's too straight. It's too thick and it's too straight. But I just have hesitated removing it because there'd be a lot of empty space, and this would just be a flat tree. So I'd really have to think about how to start over with this tree if I took that out. So instead, I'm hoping for some back budding here to get some branching perhaps, but I'm letting this develop up here into a head with the apex with the horizontal branching on it, and then you'll take your eye off of this straight branch somewhat. This branch does also reveal how a strong branch will affect the taper of your tree. So for example, this branch is a little too thick. Think of all the other branch sizes you see around there. That one's an oddball, right? And it also dominates the flow of carbohydrates and resources compared to, say, what's going out to this branch. All right, so it's a little too dominant, but whatever. I'm accepting that, and I'm gonna just work a design around that branch because I think I need it. So, and anyhow, this one is leafing out and putting out more shoots, I'd say, than the one I just showed you. There's a lot of new growth on it. Again, these plants, these olives, they flush multiple times throughout the season and don't grow in Ohio here deep into October. All right, so they're still growing actively into October. Then they finally start to slow down and stop, more or less go dormant over the winter. Once you hit, say, November, I take these things inside. They can handle frost. They can handle 32 degrees. They can handle 25 degrees. They can handle 20. But once you get below that, they can start to freeze, especially the roots. Once the roots freeze, the tree's done. If the shoots and leaves freeze somewhat, that's not great, but they will usually resprout after that happens. But if the roots freeze, the tree is more or less done. So this one is sprouting out enough with a lot of new shoots that I will probably end up pruning it this year again. While that one over there, I'm not sure whether I'll need to prune it at all this year. So, okay, that's my two prize olives. And I can show you one more tree over here. This is one that's a little bit further behind in the bonsai sort of development. It's still more in a topiary sort of style. But I've been working on it a little bit, spread some branches out, pull some things down. But these things have just developed such great, interesting nabari in the 9 years I've been styling them. That's really interesting, really cool. Now this one, the two I showed you did not flower. Again, since they were repotted, that does stress the trees. They don't grow quite the same way. They did not flower this year. Normally they flower abundantly. For whatever reason, this one did flower. And let me just show you that here's a nice developing olive, a big one. And there's some little sort of stunted olives on here as well. But so this tree actually flowered quite well, and there's a handful of olives developing on it. Now I have big trees in my yard as well, more in the order of 10 feet tall, and they still haven't fruited real well, but they are producing some fruit this year. Here's another one. Okay, so I like all things olive. I like the look of them. I like to grow them as trees, as bonsais, as eat the fruits, eat the oil. Here's a handful of some down here as well. Okay, so yes, indeed, you can grow your own olives in Ohio. All right, so what else do I have around here? So here's a couple of cuttings of citrus. I have a lemon and lime tree here, and here's a cutting I took. I probably took the cutting in very early winter, actually. I started this cutting indoors along with this tree, and so I'll develop this into bonsai style. I wired it and put some curvature into a main branch there at one point. And the goal, though, with these were cuttings, is just to get them well rooted, get them growing, start to thicken up their trunk. And then, you know, these aren't bonsai pots or anything. And then to move them over into a more stylish pot once they grow for a while. So this is same with this one. Now these citruses are nice. They develop a nice striped bark here. And so, and once they get to that point, the stem gets very tough. They're kind of hard to bend without breaking it. So, but that's an interesting feature of these citrus. All right, now, the only other thing I think I will show you, and again, this is just a little update on what's going on in my backyard, is a nabari, or not, excuse me, not a nabari, a yamadori beech tree I've been holding over here, which is one I also had on camera with you in the past. So this is a tree that I collected in Hocking County on my property there, and just having the base of an old flower pot there, and it leafed out well, which is all I really wanted it to do this year. I had done some pruning, I chopped the top back, and all I wanted to do is for it to survive, and it has. And I will continue to work on that. That has some really nice curvature. I got to go down to the ground here to really show this to you, but some real nice curvature to the trunk there. And I don't know, it's too tall, I think, for where it's going to end up being in the end. I might shorten it down to here or even lower eventually, but I just wanted it to grow and catch, and it has. So this is one I'll be working on. This is a tree I collected in the field, again, a yamadori. And this tree, I talked about this when I collected it, is probably about 25 to 30 years old, despite the size. Just given where it was growing and the stresses it was under, the deer pressure and the tough soils it was in. So that's an American beech Yamadori. Okay, and I'll be developing that through time. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to do with you today. And just say sayonara from this week's episode of my backyard bonsai here in the Midwest. You can do it here, you can do it anywhere. All right? See you next time. Bye-bye.